making money in business is nice, but I'm building a business of impact. I want to help people, right? And the revenue is secondary.
This is the Door Roller Money Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Berger. Today I have the great pleasure to speak with Bola Sokunbi. She is a certified financial education instructor, and yes, I'm going to ask her what that is and how you obtain it. But she's also a finance expert, best-selling author, speaker, writer, podcaster, social media influencer, and if that weren't enough, a growth strategist. She is the founder and CEO of one of the most popular financial resources out there, Clever Girl Finance. It offers over 30 free courses on financial education and how to achieve financial independence. Bola, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it is our pleasure. I wanted to start out, I've read the story that you've shared about your mom and some sacrifices she made, some choices she made that ultimately, I'm sure helped the whole family out, but also helped you go to college. Do you mind sharing that story with us?
Yeah, so my mom is quite the inspiration for what I do. I always call her the OG, the original clever girl. But my mom got married when she was very young. She was 19 years old. My dad was in his early 30s, and she had a high school diploma. My dad had a PhD. It wasn't something out of the norm back then when they got married. And the typical life was, the dad was the breadwinner and the mom was the homemaker, caretaker, stay at home, took care of the kids, whatever. And so, my mom started out that way and she was fine with it. And as she started to get older into her 30s, she started to see things happening with her friends that just made her uncomfortable. She would see friends who wanted to leave an abusive marriage or exit a bad relationship or just the relationship was not working out anymore and they didn't have the option to leave because they didn't have any money and they had no idea of the family finances. She would see friends who unfortunately their spouse would pass away and the family of the spouse would come in and take over everything and they would not have anything left because they had no idea of the family finances and so or the husband would have put things in his family's name and left her completely out of the loop. And there are many times I watch my mom console friends in our living room about a bad marriage, about an abusive husband, about a loss of a spouse. And I think for her it was the realization that she didn't ever want to find herself in those positions where she didn't have any options, and she felt that getting an education and getting a job, being able to get a job based on her education would give her that financial stability and give her that option. So in her mid 30s, my mom went to get her college degree and I went to her college classes with her and she came out, got a job, ended up getting her master's and started pursuing multiple different side hustles all at the same time, which again was nothing out of the norm in Nigeria. That was just something that everybody did, having multiple streams of income because of economic instability. So she did that, and fast forward several years, my dad had to retire early for health issues, for also being downsized at work, and he wasn't able to go back. And she became the breadwinner of our family, and she basically supported me to go to college because I couldn't qualify for student loans as an international student. So, my mom's actions, like I said, were very inspirational because now that I have gotten older, in the beginning of starting my business, even before I started my business, before I had the idea to start Clever Girl Finance, I was seeing the same things happening with women around me, with friends or coworkers or friends of friends, where they wanted to leave a bad relationship. They didn't know anything about the family finances. They felt stuck. They felt trapped. They felt like they didn't have any options. And so it was almost like, wow, this is a revolving cycle around just women and money and having the conversation and building our financial confidence. So my mom was definitely very impactful to just my whole life.
Yeah. So when she made the decision to go to school, you said she was in her 30s, and my mom did the same thing. I think she was maybe in her early 40s. But was the family supportive of her and her decision to do that?
I mean, it was definitely a challenge because she was changing everything.
Yeah.
And my dad struggled with that because my dad is a typical Nigerian man, and they're raised to be the provider, and he was just, why do you want to do this? Why are you not happy? or do you
Mm.
don't have enough? And so there was conflict because he just didn't understand why she felt like her life and everything she had was not enough, and she wanted to go to school, like, but he eventually got with the program. Like, my mom is very strong-willed, and she decided to go regardless, and he didn't have a choice.
Right, right. Sometimes that's how you have to do it. Uh, yeah, because it's funny. I had a mom, my mom, and then my stepmother. Because my parents divorced, and my stepmother has since passed away. But they were both, my stepmother in particular, but my mom as well. That she went to college late in life. My stepmother was a business owner, so I sort of had these strong women role models in my life. In some ways,
Mhm.
stronger than the men. So that's kind of for me sort of the norm. But so you come to the United States for college, right?
No, I go to Europe for college. So
Oh,
I
okay.
end up going to but I went to an American university, and I end up going to, so my mom had a short stint in Albany, New York when she was in college.
Okay.
So I was with her. And then we used to live in Austria, and my mom finished her college degree there. So I end up going to the same college my mom went to in Austria.
Okay. So I've read that after you got out of school, you started saving roughly 50%, maybe more of your paycheck. So one of the things I want to explore is why you did that. Like, why do some people, even if they make say the same amount of money, some will spend every dime they make and then some. And others like you decided to save, you went through at the opposite extreme, saving half or more of your paycheck. How did you make that decision? And why did you take that path?
So I was saving about 40 to 50% of my paycheck when I first started saving. And the reason behind that was just knowing the sacrifice that my parents had made for me to be able to go to college without student loans. A lot of people assume that I had rich parents who just brought the dollars out of their bank account. But my parents were converting another currency into shillings at the time. They hadn't yet converted to euros, and into dollars, because I moved to the states when my mom immigrated here. So I immigrated as well, or migrated, and she was, the dollar is one of the strongest currencies, and converting another lesser currency to that it's a lot of effort. My mom was working the whole time that I was in school, and she was working overtime, and my dad was trying to figure out what part of our retirement asset do we sell to help this daughter complete school. So there was that sacrifice that to me was, I knew what it took for my parents to send me to college. It wasn't like a right, it was a privilege that was given to me that came at a very, very high cost. And just to give you further context, I come from a family where both my parents are first generation, first to go to grade school, first to go to high school,
Mm.
first to go to college. They come from backgrounds of poverty, and my grandfather, my dad's side, did not believe in educating the female child. He didn't believe in formal education and period, because of just the British colonial rule in Nigeria. And so when it was time to send his kids to school, he was very hesitant. And when he realized that maybe there were benefits to it, he decided to only send his male sons. And that's impactful because my dad has a twin sister who is not formally educated. So my dad has two PhDs, and my aunt, his twin sister, doesn't read formally. She doesn't read or write,
Mm.
even though she's very smart in her own right. She just doesn't have that formal British education that is pretty much the standard across the world, right? So just knowing where I come from, knowing what my family background is, knowing what my extended family looks like, coming to America and getting a job for $54,000, I was like, oh my God, I'm so rich. This was before taxes. It was just, it never occurred to me not to save, not to like, just from where I came from, that was it's the incentive. It was like, I'm gonna do well. I have to be able to help my parents one day. I have to be able to give back to my family. It was never a consideration not to save.
Yeah. So while you're doing that, you're working. What line of work were you in at that time?
So I studied computer science. I was working in technology strategy, working in consulting.
Okay. And at some point, so you're saving half your 40 to 50% of your check, your income, and at some point you decide to start a side hustle. I think it was a photography business.
Yeah, so I've always had some kind of random side hustle. I mean, in college, when I moved here to do my last year of college, I was able to become an Avon lady, and I sold Avon to all my mom's friends. Every friend she had, I was their Avon rep, whether they liked it or not. So I've always had some kind of little hustle going on, even as a teenager. But I stumbled into photography shortly after starting that very first job. My dad had always loved taking pictures of us as kids, so photography was something that I loved to do, and I had purchased a semi-pro DSLR camera, and I had gone to a friend's wedding, and between a photographer coming late and other issues, she just didn't have anyone to take pictures at the beginning of her wedding, and she saw me with my camera, so she said, "Will you take some pictures?" And I took the pictures, and I got back and found some free software online called GIMP. I don't know if they still exist,
Mm-hmm.
to edit the photos. I couldn't afford Adobe Photoshop back then, and or Lightroom, and she loved them. And so I was like, maybe I can find a way to make some money out of this. So I put an ad on Craigslist at the time when it was still an actual place that you could buy and find things. And a couple hired me. I put an ad for a free wedding. And I was like, I have nothing to lose. If they don't like the pictures at the end of the day, it was free, right? They know they're taking a chance on this inexperienced photographer. So I went, I did the wedding, and they loved it so much that they gave me a $300
Nice.
gift or tip. So I was like, okay, I can take pictures. So I started to learn. I started to books, practicing with my family, workshops, online workshops from photographer communities, photographer meetup groups from meetup.com. And I built this portfolio, and I started running this side hustle that I was doing, editing photos at night, filming or sorry shooting on Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, and I got to a point where I was charging on average about $5,000 a wedding,
Wow.
and I was making more than I was making on my full time job with my side hustle. But I was exhausted, but it definitely helped me push my savings.
So why do you think you made those choices? I mean, because if we fast forward, I think it was 2015 when you started Clever Girl Finance. Um,
Yeah, about 2015, 2016, yeah.
okay, so and it's sort of focused on financial education for women and people of color, as I understand the site, and I've spent a fair amount of time on it. Um, yeah, but one of the questions, and I've wrestled with this for the 15 years I've been writing about finance, is that why does some people like you think, you take this opportunity that sort of fell into your lap to take some photos at a wedding, and then you go to the step of offering to do it free on Craigslist, and then it becomes a business, and you do all of these things that allow you, to achieve a lot of success. And some people, they just don't do that. They could, I suppose, but uh, how do you, what motivated you, I guess, is ultimately the question.
I think motivation is one thing. I think role models are another thing. I think
Hmm.
economic dynamic is another thing. Like for me, side hustles were organic because my mom always had side hustles. After school, after her full time job, we would go visit her little bakery, her Coca-Cola franchise, her hair salon. And in Nigeria, everybody had a side hustle because of economic stability. There was a lot of just, you could lose your job today, you could lose, everybody had to have multiple streams of income. Everybody's mom and dad had more than one business, even though they worked full time, just to have that income continue to come into the household. Because growing up, debt was not really something that anybody could leverage if you didn't have collateral. And a lot of people are leveraging debt because they don't have collateral, right? So you had to have cash. There was no loan, there was no credit card, there was no, I didn't grow up with any of those things. And even today, like the credit system here is very different from the credit system in Africa, right? Debt exists, but not to the degree that it exists here. You have to be able to show a backing to pay it off. So I had the opportunity to make more money, and that's what I was gonna do, right? It's my immigrant mentality. It's my, just again, knowing where I come from, knowing the opportunity that I have that some of my cousins don't have, knowing that this could make a big difference for me. That was my motivator, right? I know some people, depending on their background, they've been told they can never be successful, and they feel like, why should I bother? Some people have tried to do things and have struggled with being successful at it because of a lack of knowledge, a lack of support, a lack of resource, and they just feel like, what's the point to keep going on if I've never been able to make this work? And
Mm.
so, I guess there are different reasons why people don't do certain things. And sometimes it's just as simple as they take the opportunity they have for granted, right?
Mm.
There is also that category of people. But for me, knowing where I come from, knowing what my background looks like I'm not going to see an opportunity and not take it. I just,
Yeah.
I'm not going to.
So then, speaking of opportunity, what led you to start Clever Girl Finance?
So Clever Finance was something that I really happened by chance. I didn't have any intention of starting a personal finance business. I studied computer science. I have a minor in business. I'm a tech girl by every however whichever way you put it. But I one thing that always interested me was money. Right. I moved here from Austria. I didn't understand the U.S. Financial system. My parents were not very helpful because they didn't understand it either, and so I had to figure out what my 401k was, what credit was, how to invest, and so those are things I wanted to learn. And I remember going into a bookstore on one lunch break and trying to find, for some reason, I felt I wanted to find a personal finance book for women, right?
Mm.
That was just what was in my head. And there was nothing. There was a book by Susie Orman on wills and trusts. And then I see this personal finance book for women, and it's the New York #1 bestseller, but it's written by a man, a white man, and it was a great book. I bought it. I actually bought it twice. The first time I read it until it started to fall apart, and then I forgot it on a bus, and then I bought it again.
Can I
And
ask you what book that was?
it was Smart Women Finished Rich by David Bach.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
I just thought it was ironic that he was sharing a perspective of his grandmother,
mm,
but I wanted to read a woman's perspective, but it was a great
yeah,
book. So
yeah,
that was what, I had that in the corner of my mind there. And I just learned how to invest. And one of the things I do is when I talk about what I do to my friends, I talk about my photography business, I talk about the camera I'm buying, I talk about what I'm investing in, I talk about the mistakes I've made. I talk to my friends a lot. So I would talk to my friends about what I was doing with my money. I started a blog where I would talk about money, but then photography, but then life, everything,
yeah.
relationships. And it just became interesting. People would always ask me, Bola, what do you think about this? How should I do this? And so, fast forward many years, I discovered the personal finance world of like the get rich quickly. Um, and then I saved, there was a few others. JD Roth, I think that was his name. There was a
J.D.
number of these
Roth, yeah,
people.
Get Rich Slowly, and
Get rich slowly,
uh,
exactly. And early bloggers on
like, yeah,
the very early. And I discovered those people. And I remember I would log into
mainly
work every
men,
day.
by the way.
Mainly men, yes.
I
And
mean,
then I
I
saved
know
was
them
a
all; they're
girl.
great guys, but yeah, oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
And then I say it was the only woman. Actually, you are correct. So I would read those blogs in the morning. And I just got inspired. And so fast forward again a few years, I get married, I have kids, and I just started to feel like I want to do something that matters. I want to start another side hustle. I can't really manage the photography side hustle because I have these two small twins, so I can't be gone Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
yeah,
My time is here, and I think it was part postpartum depression where I was just feeling like I didn't know how I felt, but I just wanted to do something that was more than just being a number at a big corporation. That, the work was meaningful, but it wasn't like life changing, anything like that.
right.
So I started brainstorming, and everything that I brainstormed had to do with like financial wellness, how to do this on a budget, fashion on a budget, this to save, everything I did with my friends. And that's really how Clever Girl Finance was born.
Okay. And was it around that time you got a certified financial education instructor?
So
You went
I
through that program?
Yeah, so the Certified Financial Education Instructor program is from the National Council of Financial Educators, and it really just equips you to teach personal finance. So you take a series of modules with them around psychology of money, around behavioral finance. There's all these modules, and then you have to keep it up to date and pass the exam every year to keep the designation. And I initially was pursuing the CFP route,
Mm.
and it was interesting because I remember I had gone to see from the SCORE organization, Small Business Association or administration. I had been assigned this mentor, and I went to see her. She was a CFP, and she said, "Oh, she can't imagine." Um, she basically told me that what I was doing as a CFP would there are limitations around how much you can say, how much of your opinion you can enforce, because as a CFP you're selling certain products and services, etc. It just wasn't a good fit for me.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I just want to teach people how to do well with their money, and I don't need a designation to do that. There are lots of personal finance people who just teach based on their experience. But I just wanted to learn more about what the psychology of finance was, how people's behaviors impacted their financial decisions. So that's really why I pursued that certification. And that's why I decided to take that designation versus the CFP designation, which is
Okay.
also more involved.
Yeah. Yeah. And so with Clever Girl Finance, I know you've got a lot of courses on the site, and that you, I think it was last year, 2020, you started offering them for free. And
Yes.
tell us about that decision and about the courses, what people can learn, and I guess how was it received once you started, giving them away, basically?
So, to give you some context, Claro Finance, we are all about financial education that is not complicated. And we're all about having fun, non judgmental. This is not to shame you for what you haven't done. This is just financial knowledge to help you make smart decisions for yourself. We don't enforce any philosophy. We don't have anything that we preach. We tell you what all the options are so that you have the information to say, okay, this is going to work for me. This is not going to work for me. You can decipher the jargon that exists in the world today. And so I live in New Jersey, and we went into, I think most of the country went into official lockdown from COVID on March 13th of 2020. And it was just an overwhelm of messages on social media, on email, of people who were like, oh my God, I need help. I can't go to work. I've lost my job. I have a sick child. I can't be out working. I was just starting my financial journey. People who were just reaching out to say what should I do in this pandemic, right? It was people who had made money mistakes, people who were just getting themselves together, people who, similar to my mom's scenario, trying to leave a bad relationship and they had been saving, but then the pandemic hit and they lost their job. And I was like, at this point, as a platform that says that our focus is financial wellness for women and we want to empower women to do well, if there was ever a time that we could support our community, it would be right now, by giving them access to content and education to help them navigate through the madness of the pandemic. And that's something that I'd always wanted to do with my business, being able to offer it as a free service. But at the same time, we're not a non-for-profit, and so it was hard to, especially just getting started, and figuring out what our revenue streams were going to be. It was hard to not have any money coming in and continue to run the business, right? So in 2020, we had other streams of income, and so even though we were dropping a main stream of income, I felt that, you know what, let's just make these courses free and support our community, because as far as I was concerned, the pandemic, with no no vaccine, no diagnosis of why this was happening, there was no, if you think back to those early weeks, there was nothing, right? There was
Yeah.
no information. So this might well have been the end of the world. Let's just do our best to support our community as we all navigate the end of the world. So we made the courses free. And I didn't expect anything from it. I just wanted to help the people who had emailed us, who had contacted us. I didn't want to charge anybody who was, managing their money. We issued some refunds to people who had just joined, but and the response was overwhelming. We had tens of thousands of women sign up. I think to date we've had, of individual courses, I think close to 400,000 course
Wow.
enrollments. It was not what I expected. I just wanted to help just the people who
Yeah.
were, but it became this thing, and that income quickly replaced itself in other ways, through advertising, through brand partnerships, even, 3 4 times over. And so it was definitely a scary decision, because I was like, well, we're going to give away this income stream to support our community and be true to who we say we are, but at the same time, we're going to have to figure out how to build a parachute as we're going down. So we
Yeah,
can
that had to
continue,
have
so
been
I
a
can
tough.
continue to pay my team.
Well,
And
in the best of circumstances, that would have been a hard decision to make. But to make that decision, as you said, in the middle of or the beginning of the pandemic, had to make it particularly gut wrenching.
it was hard, but it was easy at the same time, because I making money in business is nice, but I'm building a business of impact. I want to help people, right? And
Mhm.
the revenue is secondary. And that kind of goes back to what you said about the statement for the record that I made. But it's always our community first, and this is the community who had helped us grow to that point,
Yeah.
that was now saying we need your help. So it only made sense. It was easy and hard at the same time, but it was easier than it was hard.
Do you have men take your courses?
Yeah, we have some guys in the community. We that
So,
they don't care about the branding, clever girl finance. They're there. I
well,
mean, personal finance is universal, right? So we have
yeah.
some guys in our community.
Well, that's kind of leads me to my next question. I mean, there's certainly, aspects of personal finance that are just numbers, I suppose. But what are some of the, I guess, challenges that you see that women have to confront when it comes to money, or many women have to confront that maybe are either men don't have to confront them, or it's just somehow different.
Hmm. Well, there is the most obvious one, right, which is gender wage gap. Women are paid on average less for the exact same job with the exact same skill set than their male counterparts. When you break that down by demographics, Latina, um, Black, Native American, the numbers just get more depressing. So there is that. That's the most obvious fact. But then when you take a step back and you just look at it generationally, and you look at what the standards that were impressed upon gender back, let's say in my grandmother's generation or in my mother's generation, right? There were specific roles that women had. And when women stepped out of those roles, there was, you know, society didn't embrace them well, right? Women were homemakers, caretakers, take care of the kids, similar to Bridgerton. I don't know if you're familiar with that really big Netflix show, but the aspiration was marriage. Even if you didn't want to, your family wanted you to get married. That was the goal. Um, and if you were successful, then it's yes, that's why she doesn't have a husband. She's too out there. She's too this. And men on the other side were taught to go out and work and earn money and be breadwinners. And so grandmothers talking to their daughters, to mothers, and mothers talking to their daughters were not transitioning financial education because that's not what they were used to. They were talking about recipes and homemaking and maybe money advice here and there in terms of like, budgeting for the family meals, but it was never like here's how to build the big picture of financial wellness for yourself. And that's nobody's fault, just virtue of what time was then. But when you look at the world today now, the gender wage gap still exists. But you look at women of color, Black women, Latina women, we're making, we're still impacted by that gender wage gap, which in turn means that we are investing less for our future selves because we're not earning as much, but we're earning more money than our moms and our grandmothers, most likely. And we're in a position where women are choosing not to get married. Women are single mothers. We're living on average longer than men. We need to have the conversation about money. We're breadwinners. We need to be able to have the conversation about money. We need to be able to build financial confidence. We need to be able to make those decisions because no one else can make them for us. And I think what's also very important is that when we empower ourselves with financial wellness, then we can teach our kids what our mothers or our grandmothers were not able to teach us because they just didn't know, right? Um, so, so yeah.
Well, one thing that's always baffled me, and I confess I've not spent a lot of time studying um, income inequality, say between men and women or people of color.
Hmm.
You'll see articles every now and again, whether it's the New York Times, the Washington Post, or whatever, and I'll read those. But even if we're making some progress, why do you think it still exists? And the reason, in some ways, that sounds like such a silly question, but uh, one, it's obviously illegal. Right, you can't if you have two workers and one's a man and one's a woman and they do the same job with the same experience, you can't say, well, I'm going to pay the man more. That's not permitted. And there's probably more transparency today because of the internet and social media in terms of what people are making. It's
Hmm.
kind of not that hard to figure. I mean, not maybe a specific individual, but certainly what an engineer at Google is making, or
Hmm.
that's not hard to find, that kind of data. And so, given the laws that we have and I think the increased transparency, why do you think it's still an issue today?
So it's not as straightforward. The transparency is there. We all know this gender wage gap exists, but you also have to think about that up until I think it's 1976, a woman could not buy a house. She could not open a bank account without a male signer, husband or just some man there, right? So
Yeah.
that's my mother's generation, right? Um, and then when you think about today, the stats show that women don't negotiate their salaries or their overall benefits package as much as men, because that confidence is not as is not there, is not as strong. You also have to think about the fact that a lot of women will step away from workforce to take care of children, right? And this means their years where they're not working, once a year is when they're not working. And this means that if, as a woman who's taking a step back to go and raise my kids, even if I've saved a lot of money in the bank and I want to go buy a house and I can't show an active stream of income, then I'm not going to get
Yeah.
the home
Yeah.
because I'm not actively working, right? And then I have to be added maybe as a co-spender, whatever it's called, authorized user on a partner's credit card. So there are many factors that tie into why it still exists today. Like even when you think about the whole idea of redlining, where people cannot be denied credit based on their race, gender, sexual orientation, any of that. But today, even though that is illegal, mortgage lenders then find other ways around it where they deem certain communities and certain zip codes higher risk than other zip codes. But then when you look at the map, it's mostly minorities that live in these higher risk zip codes, which then impacts their ability to qualify for credit, right? And in a lot of those communities, it's women who are anchoring those communities, single moms who are breadwinners. So there is a lot of work still to be done in this space. It's not as clear cut,
Sure.
even despite the transparency.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I know you made it. You submitted a written statement to a subcommittee in I think the House of Representatives, right? Chaired
Yes.
by I think Representative Waters, if I recall. But
Yes.
and one of the things you said in that struck me was that I guess women and people of color were much less likely to get PPP loans during the pandemic. And one of the reasons for it, as I recall from your statement, was that they were more likely not to have an existing relationship with a bank, and and that was a big issue. I mean, I have a
Yeah.
couple of friends who have businesses. One is a woman, one is a man, and they both had trouble for that very reason. Um,
Hmm.
and so I guess my question is, because in the statement you point out that for women and people of color, they're less likely to have an existing banking relationship as a small business. Why do you think that is, and what can be done about it?
I think a lot of it is just understanding the importance of having the banking relationship, having the funds to put in the bank to create that
Yeah, yeah,
relationship.
yeah.
There is a part intimidation of that. I remember when I had started saving money and I had saved a good amount of money. I think I had like $50,000 and I wanted to invest. And I was like, oh, you know what? I need to go see a financial planner in the bank and they can help me because they're the experts. And I get into this man's office and he's less concerned with the fact that I want to build long-term wealth. I'm more concerned with if I was married and who gave me the money and where did I get the money. And he was more concerned with why did this person, this woman, this black woman have this money. And I left that meeting so annoyed that I never went back to that bank.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
Right. So there is that part of it. And also you think about income levels, right? Like banks also do their outreach, but they're most likely to do outreach to people who have considerable
Yeah.
assets with them in the bank, and that's something that a lot of Black and Latino and other minorities, immigrants don't have, right? That they're aspiring to. So that definitely was a challenge, that lack of a banking relationship, because you
Mhm.
couldn't be given priority when the money came in that was getting divvied up. The bankers are going to give the money to businesses that they know, that they've encountered, that they have relationships with, and that was very impactful to women.
Did anything come out of that I don't know to what extent that subcommittee? Did you ever testify, or was it just it was a written statement?
No, it was a written statement. I did not testify. And the goal of the committee was really to make sure that voices were being heard,
Yeah.
to make sure that the impact of what was happening was being understood, and that it wasn't being pushed aside was really to shine a light on what was going on. It's not like based on that hearing, they all of a sudden decided that they're going to make policy changes and this and that, but based on a series of those types of hearings and outcries, the process of obtaining the PPE funding did change and did improve
Oh,
for
it
the
did.
next
Okay.
rounds that came out.
Okay. Yeah, I remember it being very. I didn't ever apply for a loan, but people that I knew, it was an extremely frustrating
I know people who got denied,
process.
who missed, yeah, who just couldn't.
Yeah, they
They
had to give up.
couldn't. Yeah.
Um, well, good. How did you? I'm just curious. How did you get that opportunity to share your views with the subcommittee? How did that come up?
They actually reached out to me because I was doing a lot of, I talk a lot about just navigating challenges of being a female founder, female business owner, being a Black woman in this space. And so somebody that worked within the subcommittee group had read an article I think I had done on my personal website,
Okay.
and they reached out to me to ask me questions about my own experience, like more detail on my experience with capital and things like that. And yeah.
So you've lived in a lot of different areas of the world. Unlike, I grew up in Ohio. I basically cornfields were the only thing that I knew for half my life. You've had a lot more breadth of experience than I have in terms of different places to live. So I'm curious, do you think it's either more difficult or just different for women and people of color in the United States to build wealth and perhaps become business owners than it is in, say, Europe or or in Africa or other areas of the world? Or do you think it's pretty much a challenge everywhere?
It's a challenge everywhere, but when people say America is a land of the opportunity, it truly is. There are very few places in the world where uh, they can be as liberal, or they have as much opportunity, or they have as much government support. Especially where I come from in Africa, that's just not the case.
Mm.
In Nigeria, that's not the case. There is a lot of opportunity here if you choose to seek it out, if you choose to take advantage of it. I think sometimes the opportunity here is taken for granted, and sometimes it's taken for granted because people intentionally choose to do that, also because they just don't realize the opportunity that they have, and they've been, I don't know what the word is, they've been kind of like subdued into this space of just accepting what they've gotten, and this is my space in life and I can never be better than this. And going back to my earlier statement, a lot of this is systematic as well, where it's going to be hard for you to progress out of it unless you have certain information and certain insights and certain access to certain resources and access to certain support. So I always tell people that, especially when you're coming from a minority community and immigrant community that struggles financially here, one of the things that you want to aim for as you pursue your own financial wellness is to also step back and also educate your community, educate your family, educate the people in your church, educate the kids on the corner who come to say hi, and just give them that knowledge. And the knowledge is something that seems so basic, right? Budget, save. Everybody assumes that we should all know that, but it's not. It's not that simple. But if
Mm.
we can also do our part to educate our families, our communities, then we also help to make a difference and drive that change.
Yeah, yeah. I always thought too, kind of related to that, is our own self-image. I think we all tell ourselves um, stories about our abilities,
Yes.
and some of those can be positive, some can be negative. Um, and I think sometimes we'd be better off to ignore that. I guess at least to the extent that they're negative. And depending on where you've come from and maybe your parents and your community, those stories can be, you can be anything you want to be,
Or you
right?
can,
That
you
would
would
be
never
good.
be
That's a
anything.
good story. But not all the stories that we're told, particularly at a young age, are positive.
No, and we're very impressionable at that age, especially
Yeah,
if the stories are coming from people we truly look up to, then it becomes the truth. Whatever they tell us is truth. Everybody is
yeah,
meant to be in debt. Get a credit card. Okay, my favorite uncle, I love him so much. This is what he said, and he seems to be okay in his life, so I'm gonna do the same thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember as a kid, my parents didn't have a credit card. I think the first credit card they got was a Sears card. That was the idea of a credit card back in the 70s. Uh, well, yeah. So among all the things we've talked about that you've done, you've also written three excellent books, right? I think it's
Yes.
three. Do I have the right number?
I just finished my fourth book, but that comes out next year.
So how do you, what's that book going to be about?
That book is a personal story. It's
Oh, good.
about my life and building my business, and it's like women's empowerment.
Now, do you self-publish or do you work with a publisher?
So I have a traditional publisher. I'm published with Wiley.
Okay. And I assume folks, well, they can find your books on your website.
They're on the website. They're everywhere you purchase your books. They're on Amazon. They're on Audible, etc.
How do you find the time to write a book? Like, how do
Oh
you
my
like?
God,
I mean, like the nuts and bolts of it. Like, do you say, okay, every morning I'm going to write for an hour, or how do you actually get it done?
I have kids. Well, my kids are older now. They're 8 years old now. But there's still a lot, right? I wake up earlier before my house wakes up to work, and then sometimes when my kids go to bed. But when I write books, I have to be very structured. I cannot write without a plan, otherwise I won't complete it. So I know exactly what I'm going to write before I write it because I've laid out a very detailed outline, and I commit to it because I submit that outline to my publisher as well. So I
Wow.
can't deviate off of it. So
Right.
I try to write in the mornings, in the evenings. An hour is a lot. I write for 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
Oh, that's okay,
If I get
right?
5 minutes, that's how it works. And then sometimes I write and I will step away from a book for 3 weeks and I won't remember what I wrote.
Mm.
And then I'll spend the next week reading what I wrote so I can continue.
Yeah, yeah.
So I
Now,
just try to make it work, right? Yes, I admire. There's an Danielle Steele. She's written
mm,
like 100 something books, and she
crazy.
says she can write for 24 hours straight. I'm like, I wished I had the luxury to just sit and write for 24 hours straight.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know how she does it, and there are a number of prolific writers, both fiction, nonfiction. I don't know how they do it. It's amazing. But I mean, frankly, you're in that category with a fourth book. I mean, that's
It's
anyway.
painful, but I get it done.
Well, that is terrific. So if folks want to, to follow you and your work, obviously there's Clever Girl Finance. Are you on social media in particular that you'd want to share with everyone, or some other places where they can follow your work?
Yes, we're on Instagram at Clever Girl Finance. We're on YouTube. Just search Clever Girl Finance, and on our website, clevergirlfinance.com.
So let me flaunt my age for a moment. Instagram, I have an account. I don't Instagram, but I'm fascinated by finance uh, folks that use Instagram.
Hmm.
So like, what are the pictures that you post on Instagram? Because everything
You
has to
know,
have a picture, right?
That's very interesting because I was one of the early users of Instagram because it was designed for photographers. So I was actually in their
Right.
beta as a photographer using Instagram, and I found it boring just to look at pictures. And because the captions were different, they're very limited and stuff. So, but now from finance, it's like motivation, it's infographics, it's
Okay.
text. Whatever people can read. Sometimes people just put pictures of themselves, and the caption is like, save money. I just transferred $200 to my savings. I'm so happy, and they're smiling. So it's it's become a
Okay.
way to communicate in words and in visuals, not
Yeah.
just photographs.
Good. Okay. Well, Instagram. Fair enough. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.